Hi, I'm Nelson Ford from the Gunsmith, Phoenix, Arizona. My son has printed me out more of the um, questions. We had one on W.C. Fields. I always thought he was fun. I like I think my favorite is the one with Mae West called My Little Chickadee. That's a fun one. Anyway, a buddy of mine had this. It was a lamp. It had a thing that came out the top. You put a shade on. I got rid of that, and he sits on my bar, so I like him. Questions. When should a S&W cylinder stop come back up during the cylinder rotation? Halfway between notches, just before the notch ramp? I have found if it's just before the notch ramp, a lot of times they'll skip by. This guy says his doesn't. That's good. He might have a lot of contact. It's a lot going on when you have those bolts. I wish I had a giant bolt in my hand so I could do things with it. That's a good thing for me to make up. But if it's skipping by, one of the things you can check, and I don't know why, right after the arc that comes up through the frame, on that flat, you'll see sometimes little rises. And if you file those out, you can bring it up higher. But you have to look how it's contacting with the trigger. Sometimes it won't allow it to go up any further. And working with that trigger paddle and what goes on there, you have to figure that out in your head. Look at it and think about what you're doing. A lot of times, the biggest problem with the cylinder stops, and I like them to drop in between notches. I should say that right now. One of the problems is you'll see them come down, but the trigger will slip off it really quick. So it comes down and bobs right back up and hangs onto the trigger, and it doesn't even want to rotate. It's jammed. And what I do is I elongate the slot to the forward side of it, muzzle side of the slot in the bolt, with a little round needle file, and that way it can sit closer to and make more contact with the trigger paddle, and it'll get it down to stay down longer. And that's usually the biggest problem with those. And remember, whenever you're moving that part this way, it could get in the way of the trigger coming out because it sits down in that valley. That's why the center of the trigger is open there. It sits down in there. So sometimes you got to cut part of the bolt away so you can get the trigger out. The bolt will hold the trigger in place. I've had triggers just right out of the box where I had to, with the gun laying down, side plate off, I've had to push the cylinder stop forward in order to get the trigger out. And after I do that, I cut away a little bit after the curve, and when it comes down, right in there on the curve, I cut a little bit out of way so I can get that trigger in and out if I have to make multiple changes. A lot of times, I had a hand in and out of an I-frame today 15 times at least. And so sometimes you have to get those parts in and out, and you have to make it so you can get them in and out. Bolt can interfere with them. What else does that bolt do? That covers two of them. The bobbing, I call it bobbing when it comes down a little bit and goes right back up in place, and moving it back. Oh, the bolt that goes, part of the bolt that goes through the frame. Remember, as you move it forward, it's going to want to drag on that frame. So sometimes you got to cut a little bit back if you move that bolt further forward. So keep asking questions on those bolts. I'll keep trying to answer them, but there's a lot to learn there. Should you mention shear, hammer, disconnect? So obviously this guy with disconnect, he's talking 1911, and he asking about MIM parts. Don't do any filing to remove metal from those parts. Probably good information, but I don't want to work on those parts anymore. And a lot of people use those value line hammers. Big manufacturers use them. Colt doesn't. Premier Wilson gunstone, Premier Dan Wesson gunstone, but a lot of the manufacturers use those, what I call value line parts. And you can always tell he cocked the hammer back. You see that little casting hole right on the top of the half cock notch. And those are bad juju. But you should also know that just not MIM parts, Smith and Wesson, one of the questions I ask people over the phone, I will not take guns if somebody just emails me. You don't know who you're dealing with. And so you got to get them on the phone and talk to them. And I have a lot of simple questions I ask them, and they just come to me because I've lived in hell before. And, today a guy said, I have a barrel for my gun. Somebody screwed up the back of the barrel. the number of things. He wanted me to put a new hammer and trigger in and something else. And I'm thinking, if it needs all that, somebody's been in this gun and hurt it, and I don't want to get near it. So I quoted him a high price to chase him away. Nice guy, good guy, but when you get those guns that have been through the tornado, stay away from them. You never know what's going on there. But what I was first alluding to is the hammer full cock notch and the full cock notch portion of the trigger where they engage on a Smith revolver. If you polish that case hardening away, you'll have the same problem you may have on a MIM part. You've got to have that case hardening left alone. And anybody that polishes a sear contact area on a hammer or trigger in a Smith revolver is nuts, and you don't want to deal with them. If you don't have the let off you want, reduce your trigger turn spring, get another hammer or trigger, but you don't start polishing on those parts. So if I understand correctly, a Model 19.4 should not shoot 158 grain. I don't go with the grain of the bullet. It doesn't matter what the grain of the bullet is. Smith has a program on 125s only on the little titanium jobs, but I'm more worried about on a 19 burning the forcing cone. And if you use H110, 630 they stopped making because it was blowing up guns at cold temperatures. But 630 was a brother and a sister of H110, as well as 296. They'll burn forcing cones. Somebody asked me if 2400 would burn forcing cones as well. And I think anything you really pipe up, it's going to do damage. The ball powders seem to be the worst. Whenever you stress them out, and I was the worst of it. And watch my Smith and Wesson end frame video. I mean, when I was a kid, I was loading 32 grains at 296 with a 180 grain Sierra and a 44. It's way off the charts, and I don't recommend it. And so, when you do that stuff, expect trouble. There are companies that make ammunition that are known for their hot loads, and that scares me as well. So there's nothing good about magnums in a Model 1966, 13, 65, any of those K-frames, early K-frames. Of course, they just make a new 66 now where they've changed the ejector rod to be real thin. They don't have the center pin inside the extractor rod, and they've lowered the yoke, and the cone is full now, and you can put a lot more magnums to them now. It's a good change if you want a magnum in that size gun. I've had enough of the magnums. When I test fire 44s, I use 5 grains of bullseye for 740 feet per second. I don't need all the hot stuff anymore. Well, there's a great story for that stuff. I was wondering if you could comment on later S&W revolvers, whether the hammer block is a redundancy to the hammer rebound slide. You need to watch my K-frame history. The hammer block, the rebound slide, returning the hammer, and it comes back and returns the hammer. 2 little camming surfaces come into play, and it returns the hammer. That's not going to work. Those parts will flex. If you drop them under a serious fall, the hammer will flex, the pivot pin will flex, everything will flex. Those will fire. I've had them fire under my legs. A gun slipped off a counter once. I'm repeating myself from another video. A gun slipped off my counter once. It was my own 44 mag, and a gunsmith in the early 80s I met when I was doing speed matches. Told me you don't need to watch the hammer return. You don't need it. I trusted him, and for 2 weeks I took him out of guns. I called everybody up and put them back in the guns because God gifted me with a Model 29 slipping out of a holster at a double gun rig, landed on the ground and the side of me, fired a round up between my legs and into the ceiling. That's not a pretty picture. I put all my safety bars back in. So the rebound slide assembly, returning a hammer, is not going to save your life. Let's try one more here. Had an old 38 S&W from 1910-ish, had the lanyard, completely restored it because it was really rusty one night. I actually knocked it off my coffee table, and it fired right past my head by inches into the ceiling. It was so close, I heard a weird whoomp sound as it went by me. And so here's a guy that had an early, a 1910 did not have a safety bar in it, and the hammer returned and pulled the firing pin out of the wall, so it did flex and fire. And this happened to a guy named Jack. I have a 36 3-inch heavy round, blah blah blah. Use a clip grip, carry an appendix. The extra inch puts the muzzle safely past my own muzzle, and it disappears nicely. Extra radius helps a lot. What do you think of the 3 inches? You know any mentionable history about them? I'm going to try to cover that at another time. 3-inch barrels are really wonderful things. People love them. On the K frames, you can always add 50% of the value of the gun of a 3-inch. And I'm going to close up these questions now. Please send some more. And I love doing the Q&A. Talk to you later.